Hello, hello. Welcome to the Global Citizen Therapy Podcast, the podcast for women of color who are daughters of immigrants to feel seen, heard, and validated. My name is Nancy Diaz, and I am a trauma-informed therapist, speaker, and your podcast host today. And now, let's jump into today's episode. Welcome back to the Global Citizen Therapy Podcast. I have another exciting guest today on the podcast. So, yes, we're going to have a great conversation about all things reproductive health and how that affects actually our mental health, because it's a very important conversation to have. So today I have with me De'Nicea Hilton Harper, and I always love to share how I meet my podcast guests. This one was pretty funny. We met on Focus Mate, which is a website that allows you to co-work with other people, and you always get matched with someone randomly in another part of the world. And so De'Nicea is joining us from the US, and yeah, we just ended up. So usually what you do is you just say, hello, how are you? And what are you working on? And then you start the timer and it goes for 25 minutes. And we just started chatting and we didn't get any work done. We just ended up chatting for like an hour, I think, the first time. Just had so much in common. So yeah, but definitely when she told me, what she does, I was like, yes, definitely got to have her on the podcast when we're talking about sex, sexual health, sexuality. We're definitely gonna have her on. So yes, very excited that you could be here tonight. Tonight for you, isn't it? Yeah, tonight.
Yeah, tonight.
Thank you, thank you. Do you mind introducing yourself for those who don't know you? Please tell us.
Sure, I don't mind at all. I had to mute myself because I was over here laughing so hard. Like, yep, that's pretty much our focus was a different focus that day.
Love this podcast.
I I know, but I really do appreciate you for like inviting me and welcoming me here too. But hi everybody, I am De'Nicea Hilton Harper, and I actually am a classically trained, formally trained Dr. of Eastern Medicine and holistic well-being consultant. While I had been in practice, I noticed that there are some connections when it comes to um, someone's authentic being actually expressing itself, and then how that actually shows up in the body. So, how does it show up in the signs and the symptoms when it comes to physical health, mental, and emotional health? I was specializing in menstrual health and reproductive health, fertility, and all that jazz. So, I really got to see how that played out. But right now, I have taken that wisdom and that insight, and I love, love, love just creating playful experiences for women to go ahead and be able to feel safe and feel confident to be who they really are. And when they are at a loss of who that is, then we get to actually use the body to give us that wisdom and insight as to who that is. And I get to facilitate those processes.
Wow, that's amazing. And you do speaking as well. So tell us a bit about that.
Yes, I do speak mostly with play shops, and then also getting into more and more keynotes as well. Things topics typically run the gamut because I do see holistic health as touching so many various aspects of our lives. So oftentimes I'm going and I'm speaking about mental health and how it relates and how it might show up in the body, or it's like burnout, or is it stress management? Surprisingly, like time and productivity, right? Like, how does that actually apply? Learning what your nuances are, learning what your styles are. I call it a perfect, authentic leadership play style. Because I believe every single one of us is a leader in our own way and in our own life. It's just knowing what's your authentic leadership style and how can you do that using play. Play is a double meaning for me, so I want everybody to know that. Full disclosure. Um, Play is, of course, playing in the sense of like we're going to do embodied activities, but it's an acronym. So it stands for the potential and learning about yourself. So although we are doing these activities, there's meaning that's behind every single thing that I produce and that I introduce to you, so that the intention is that you get to learn just a little bit more about who you are. And then because we already played with it and you already did it, you're like, oh, snap, I already did it. I don't have to fear like not doing it because you already did it.
I love that. Yeah. And I think the importance of play. I mean, there's so much that we have in common, and I think that's why we were chatting for so long the first time that we met.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, the importance of play and connecting with that inner child and, using it to fuel your creativity, not just in your personal life, but even in the workplace. And I actually was just chatting with my own therapist about that this morning. And I was like, you know what, I'm embracing that creativity that I've been having flow lately and just kind of thinking,
Yeah.
you know what? I have been thinking about work quite a bit, even after hours, even after I'm supposedly logged off. But you know what? I'm like, this is my passion, my purpose. And, I'm just grateful for the creativity that's coming in. And I'm just gonna play with it and just see what comes of it. Right. And just, yeah, it's
Yeah.
amazing with the power of creativity, especially when you actually release it, right? And you actually allow it to be instead of
Hmm.
trying to lock it up and saying like, "Oh no, this is not the time and the place." When you just embrace it and you just say, "You know what? This is serving a purpose. It's allowing me to be, like you said, a better leader and show up, in different ways in my business and in my practice, everything." So yeah, I love
Yeah.
and I think in
And
play, it's so important for us to play because that does help us just rest, relax. It's the ultimate form of self-care, I think, because you're getting to connect with that inner child. You're getting to do something different. This is something that I give quite often. My clients know this, that I give quite often as homework is, how can you play this week, right? How can you connect with that inner child? How can you release those, quote unquote negative emotions like anger and things like that? Like, how can you do something in a way that actually helps you reconnect? Because so often we're just stuck on like, I have to be this adult, and if I'm going to express anger, it needs to be like in a kickboxing class or something. And I'm like, what about just screaming into a pillow? What about punching a pillow? Like connecting with that, like just playing with it, right? Like experiment.
yeah.
I think that's so important to actually experiment. Yeah.
Well, I think too, like it's the listening to you, there were a couple things that stuck out, right? Like one of them is that time, right? Like time and place. And for some reason, arbitrary reason, don't know where it all came from, but it's like, oh, even as children, it was like, no, you don't do that here, right? Like this is not the place, this is not the time. And so then we kind of started getting confused as to, okay, well then when is the appropriate time and place? And then like now as adults and going into workplaces, and then there's the whole professional workplace. And that comes with its own set of beliefs and rules that we don't really know where they came from. And apparently it only applies to certain places then and not others, but they're both workplaces. Like, so it's just so much confusion there. And at the same time, it's like when it comes to creativity though, it's gonna come. Like, and when you allow, because you did say that you use that word repeatedly, and it's true, it's like to allow is like to open yourself up to it, right? And we're at an interplay with so many different energies that are opportunities for creativity to express and come through. It's just that we try to like create these boxes and these containers. Like it's 5 o'clock, let me shut off. I'm not going to create anymore. Or at 6 a.m. now, like I can create now. And it's like, yeah, that's not quite how it works. And so like, um, and so when you're in that creative flow and you're in those juices, like I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, but it's the author. It's I think it's Mahali, and then it's like a C. It's is the beginning of the last name. But wrote the book Flow, and it's like when you are in flow, time and space really doesn't even exist anymore. Oftentimes, people think about flow being related, mostly to runner's high, right? I don't run unless I'm being chased, but I get the concept, you know? So I'm like, just saying that there are times like even in my own work, especially if it's something like creating something. Like I was creating a presentation actually on time and productivity so that you can like identify I was introducing to them the various influences and ways that there's like these energies that we interplay with, but like their timing. and what it could look like, what could it feel like, but then you need to identify like and observe what are your own energy cycles, right? Because in that way you can really allow like when it's gonna come, it's gonna flow and it's gonna be, So as I'm working on this presentation, I'm literally in this whole flow. Don't know what happened with time at all. Like all of a sudden it's like 2 o'clock and I'm in the morning and I'm going, what? And so like, but I was so into it and I didn't want to just block it and stop it. And it was like, all right, I think the next day I can like do something to sleep and, all that stuff. And the beautiful part about it as well, and I understand that this is my situation and I'm grateful for to have the opportunity to be as flexible as I can be in my schedule, um, is that like I know it's not going to be forever
Yeah.
because everything's in flux. It's in flux, right? So like those high creativity times is going to be there. And I like to just tap into it and leverage it as much as possible, whatever easily comes out like of any of the projects. And then I know that at another phase, a different type of energy is going to be there. And it might be a little bit more detailed. I might feel a little bit more slow. And actually, neither one of those energies are wrong. Like nothing's better than the other. Um, and that's also why I don't look at it like, oh, it's high energy versus low energy. It's like, no, it's all energy. Because as soon as we say high or low, what happens is we apply a judgment. And then now you have a whole sub niche of people that are like, are you low in energy? Like,
Yeah.
and then now they're preaching for you to be high energy. And so then people end up adding this pressure on themselves.
It's
Like,
horrible. We take
what's
high
high?
energy all the time.
Yeah.
It's
No, there is not high energy all the time. Not at all. Not even in nature.
do you want to achieve happiness, 100% of the time? Like, who's what? You can't be happy
Right.
100% of the time. You can't be high energy 100% of the time. And I love what you
Right.
said about, the cycles as well. And what you're talking about, as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, there is kind of that shift that we have to make, right? From employee to business owner to CEO to entrepreneur, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, we have to honor those creative flows, and we have to honor that time is very different for us. And we have to just, yeah, when we are feeling like, okay, these creative juices are flowing right now. So yeah, it doesn't matter if it's 2 a.m. Like, yeah, we do have that luxury and privilege oftentimes that we can just adjust our schedules and just say, okay, well, maybe I'll take a nap in the middle of the day because I was very creative and working late.
Yep.
And it's,
Yeah.
it's been a process. And for me, I think it's definitely something I'm still learning, something I'm still getting used to, letting go of that judgment, letting go of that 8-hour workday kind of mentality of like, oh, feeling guilty if I didn't work, 8 hours, 7 hours. But you can, definitely have very productive 1-2 hour like sprints of like you're just super focused, you're very creative, you're having all these great ideas. Like just allow it to happen and just invite that creativity and that play and just yeah, I'm big on experimenting. That's what I tell my clients all the time is, we have to approach everything in our life as an experiment and just kind of go into it with that curiosity. And then
Hmm.
we start to let go of the guilt and allow ourselves that permission, right? Of okay, let's just see what happens if I try this, and let's just see what happens if I try that. And I think especially
Yeah.
when you said cycles, I was thinking, I was just having this conversation with another freelancer friend, and she was saying like, yeah, you know what? Sometimes it does depend on where we're at in our menstrual cycle, and we have to also be very mindful of that. And she said that that's why she loves being a freelancer and entrepreneur is because she gets to honor that, when she is very feeling very crampy and needs to take more downtime, more rest, or just yeah, that lower energy, which yeah, we have to come up with a better word for that because yeah, you're right. There is judgment when you're thinking like, oh, I'm very
Hmm.
low energy this week, and that you're like, oh well, I started my period, so of course that makes sense. But still, there's like you feel a bit ashamed because you're like, oh, I'm not that productive this week. But definitely,
Right.
it definitely does impact our mental health. And so once we start to see that connection of, yeah, okay, so you're on your period, you're maybe feeling a bit crampy, bloated, whatever, you're in pain, whatever it is. And so then, yeah, it does affect your mental health. We know about that connection. We start to feel the shame and the guilt for not being productive. And it's all just connected. There's so much that goes into it.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons that I wanted to have you on the podcast is to help us understand a little bit more about menstrual health and about the importance of actually seeing how it ties back to our mental health.
Well, and so if we let's just take the working thing because we're already playing with that right now. Like it's even going and actually just taking a look at history in the sense of work, women weren't in the workplace. So then when there was all of the whole, okay, well, let's experiment with how if we have this lineup of men in this factory and this belt is going, how many things can they produce at this time period? Like if it were given 30 minutes, oh, let's push it. Let's see now an hour, you know? So it's kind of like just putting that simply into context is so liberating
Mhm.
because it's nothing wrong with you. The way that the whole work system evolved, it didn't even include people who were menstruating. They were at home with children, cooking, cleaning, period. Right? Like that's no
Flexibility.
pun intended. But like just putting that into context, like when you can frame it that way, it's like, oh, holy guacamole, that's actually pretty accurate. So when people kind of like and they might get upset because of the way things are. And it's just like, where do you want to allocate your energy? It's just understanding that that's the way that it was. It hasn't changed much since then. And then at the same time, this is why you have many women starting businesses. They're like the fastest growing out of the genders, quote unquote, is that women are doing it. And then the thing is that many they're learning about these energy cycles and fluctuations, like what's playing a role, and then they're like also for themselves. Some are even starting businesses simply because of their health, right? So it's seeing that, I think once you can have that frame of thought in that context, it could be freeing. And then it's like, okay, well now I understand that. Cool. Now the next thing then is, all right, well you want to get to know your own cycle. So and that's just one. So like I was saying, there's several energies that are at play, and so this is only one of them. I just want to point that out so that listeners know that there are others because it's funny because I was talking with somebody about this recently, and what it is she does some menstrual health education as well, and like the thing is that some kind of really jump in, and then there are I could speak about the generalizations of these, and the thing is that then they go and feel a certain way because they don't feel that. Like, so at that particular phase, they may feel something different, and then now they think something is wrong with them then, and it's like, "No, no, 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 no." So I wanna preface it by saying, "Just breathe and
Reminder.
understand." Yeah, like, just kind of begin to look at yourself, just in observation. And so when I say observation, I want you to think going into like a science lab where you're simply observing and you're just paying attention to what's actually happening. What it is then that you start documenting are your observations. And so it's like, what types of observations are you looking for, right? It might be that all of a sudden, and especially if you're a client of Nancy's, I'm sure it's going to be like very specific things that you start journaling and writing out, and you're starting to learn how to figure and see patterns. So this is actually going to be really, really helpful if you're already into that. And so then what it is that we're going to layer that with, okay, what are my cycle days? And then where do these patterns pop up along the cycle? And so like one of the basic things about the cycle is that it's not only when you're actively bleeding. So many only count just the days that they're bleeding and then they don't count anymore. But what it is that you want to count from the day that you're actively bleeding and just continue counting forward until the next bleed. That represents a full cycle. And so when you have those days, even the number of days gives some insight, right? Then we start breaking it down. It can be broken down into 8+ phases, depending on school of thought that you follow. But if I was to just break it down into half, just for ease of our conversation and time, you have before ovulation and then you have after ovulation. And the time period that can fluctuate the most, because there's arguments that whether the last half is going to be it's consistently 14 days, and it's actually what happens before ovulation, which we call the follicular phase, that moves. So that's why then if you're experiencing high stress, or your eating pattern change, time zones change, or something like that, right? Maybe it happened during the follicular phase and that affected the timing of ovulation.
Yeah.
But we know that after you ovulate, it's going to be 14 days, and that's called the luteal phase. Okay. So, the things that you want to be on the lookout for are definitely the ways that you're thinking, like pattern, like things that you're noticing. It's like a repeated type of thinking, perhaps on a topic, or it's just like, are you critiquing yourself a lot more? When is that even happening? We might actually be critiquing ourselves more in the second half of the cycle than in the first half of the cycle. Why? Because the happy, rosy, eye colored glasses, like estrogen, has decreased. And so, therefore, we actually are a little bit more hypercritical at that time. The benefit to that is, oh man, this is where it's amazing, is when there's things like you could be working on a project, and remember, a project is divided into different phases of the project coming into fruition. It's an idea coming into form, right? So at that phase, when you're so critical, that's the time to go through with a fine tooth comb of whatever's happening in the project. You're actually able then to almost kind of remove a little bit of the emotion about it,
Yeah.
right? To see clearly a little bit more of the details. Now, when it comes to personal life, it's going to be things like, and this is what used to irk me a lot is when people be like, "Oh, she's PMSing because I didn't take the trash out," blah, 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 right? Or something like that. And
Yeah.
it's like, no, actually, so please stop apologizing. I'm going to tell you that, unless you're intentionally being mean and rude. But like, don't apologize for it. What it is that estrogens feel good. Hey, whatever isn't really there as much. So what's predominating though, like progesterone, there's some little hints of testosterone even as well, is that ability to clearly communicate what you're desiring. And so you're just being very frank with it. It's not sugar coated like it would be if it was the first half of the cycle. Because during the first half of the cycle is when estrogen's ramping up. Like the body's thinking, we're going to possibly reproduce. So let me turn on the charm, and then people like you start wanting to actually be nice to other people. It just comes out fluidly. Like,
Mhm.
I mean, it's really cool, even the studies, and like videos that are done where you can even see the way that you walk. The sway, they measured like the sway from left to right and how wide it gets as it comes up to ovulation versus how much more tighter it'll get afterwards. Because that's the time the body's like, hey, let me do a little dance, like knock me up, like, and this, but
Yeah.
the thing is even though you're not trying to, you may not be biologically trying to create, you're creating in other ways in your life, right? And so that can happen in relationships. And like the convo that I was saying I was having with someone else the other day was that she was saying that some of her clients feel off, like that, oh, well, up to ovulation, like it's supposed to be this like kind of charming, a little bit more extroverted type of energy, more willing to hang out with people and all of that jazz, but they actually don't feel like that. Um, and I actually look at it because remember I said energy is energy. So I don't look at it as high energy or low energy. I'm just like, what type of energy is it? And what I found was that during ovulation, some are their intuition actually is increased. Their levels of not only intuition, but their empathic abilities, they're more sensitive. And so then, as that sensitivity has increased, what feels like they're dragging is because they're actually tapping into what's around them, and it could be a little bit much. And so then the response is, I don't feel like dealing, and I'm just gonna sit here at home, because really it's too much. Like, it's the sensitivity levels are just that high. So I'm not saying go and like just hide at home all the time. But what I am saying is, if you are recognizing that that's what it is, then there's other practices that you can do where you can then be observant, like, in the sense of like, oh, I'm sensing that that's outside of me. It is not mine. And I'm cool. like,
Like,
like just being able to say that's not my energy. Like, it's like, oh, okay, sweet. And then now you're aware of it and just move on. Right. So that was like really like high level. And this is like the beauty that is within the cycle itself. So, like, when you're making those observations of the thoughts that are coming up, even taking note of your digestive system, bowel movements, urinary patterns, those are also very important to note. Pain levels, like, for some, they might have, especially if it's endometriosis related, um, and some that experience PCOS also experience pelvic pain too. But like, even seeing if there's a pattern to the pain, the intensity of the pain, and where. So as you heard me kind of go through the cycle a little bit, there's all sorts of hormone fluctuations. So sometimes even just putting it up, like whatever you're experiencing, remembering your non-judgmental observation, and then putting that against the whole menstrual cycle, we can then start to see, oh, this is happening around cycle day, whatever. Or is this around cycle day 21? And then that's when there's actual a big hormonal shift that's supposed to be happening. Perhaps that shift is actually not happening as effectively or efficiently as it's supposed to, but you're experiencing it as pain or being extra moody or extra angry. Like, it seems like it's more than. And so it's like, all right, so we know that shift is not actually going as seamlessly as it's supposed to. So what's affecting it? And then that's how you can then take your observations and start to really look at, what can I change? Like, what did I eat? Like, what didn't I eat? Because many are so busy that some aren't even eating, right? Or they're not drinking. I may have this with me, but sometimes I'm like, hey, how many times did I fill this up? I'm not sure. So I have to like literally remind myself
mm,
to drink. And for some people, they don't really realize how dehydrated they really are. And so, and that plays a role in blood, like blood flow. It plays a role in body pain. Water can actually thin the blood. And like in Chinese medicine, when we look at certain types of pain, we'll say, oh, there's some blood stagnating. Like, and so it's like, huh, why the heck is the blood stagnating? And sometimes it can be water. Like, water is just not there to help it flow and move.
yeah,
So there's a lot of, definitely there's a lot of little things that's involved for sure. But if you can, like, begin to do your observations. If you're working with Nancy, like, you might already have some, but now just go back to, like, add in from your calendar, like, oh, my cycle started on this day, and then just count forward, and then start putting that against it, to see if there's something that like pops up, and seeing where in the cycle did that pop up. um and I think it's really, and I think it's valuable to really know that information, and then also getting to know what are the roles of these hormones. They're not bad, right? Like, I know people, when I say, oh, it's estrogen dominance, and they make it seem like such a horrible thing, and it's like, people, like, let's just try to keep this as neutral as possible. Because if we don't, people add a lot of pressure on themselves, and that just creates a whole nother stressor
Yeah.
as they're trying to figure out and navigate their own health and their healing.
Mhm.
So I did want to just, mention that so that you can just kind of go with grace, have some compassion for yourself.
Yeah, I love that.
You know, it's a
See,
journey.
this is why I wanted to have this conversation with you because we just have like we're on the same wavelength. Like these are all the things that I talk about with my clients, bringing in that compassion, bringing in that curiosity, and yeah, removing yourself a little bit, coming in as the scientist, and treating it like an experiment. Okay, and this is we're in the part where we're just observing, right? We're taking notes, we're gathering information, we're being very objective with it, right? And
Yeah.
there's no good or bad. It's just all giving us information that we're going to need. It's all connected, right? It's connected to our mental health 100%. Like even what you were saying about drinking water, like we know like drinking water definitely can help you with your mental health. So it's all really connected. And I think when I was in grad school and we learned about the biopsychosocial assessment, I think that's what I was like, okay, if I ever become a therapist, because my journey was a little bit weird. Like I actually ended up in in the classes to be a therapist by accident. I didn't know that getting a master's in social work would be training you to be a therapist. I thought we were doing something totally different. So, but anyway, I got the whole degree and I love my job now. So it ended up working out. But yeah, I remember like thinking, like I was going through the whole program thinking like this is cool, but I don't think I'll ever work as a therapist. It's funny how life goes, right? But
Right.
when we were learning about the biopsychosocial assessment, I was like, oh my God, this just makes sense. Like instead of just looking at it from like, what's going on in your mind, right? And just looking at the
Hmm.
psychological, like looking at the biological, right? What's going on with your body? Because yeah, if we start to, as therapists, bring in a little bit more of like what's going on with your physical health, and we start to think of like, yeah, because of course that impacts your mental health, and
Hmm.
actually looking at the social aspects. And this is what I loved about the program. And I'm glad that I got my master's in social work instead of, in psychology or something else, because I can actually look at, oh yeah, there's all these social factors, your current environment definitely impacts the way that you're thinking, the way that you're feeling, all of it. But yeah, I love that the biopsychosocial assessment was so, like it did ask about, how are you when was your last pap smear, for example, things like that. And I was like, I love that. Yeah, that's a good question. And every time I ask a new client that, they're like, oh, we're probably due for one of those. I'm like, yeah, it's a good reminder. We do have to be thinking about that. We have to be taking care of that aspect of our health as well, right? But
Yeah.
even like as I've been practicing for a few years now solo, and I'm like, you know what? I'm like little by little adding my own questions to this because I'm like, you
Mm,
know what? It doesn't
bingo.
ask about birth control. And we know that, yeah, when you're pumping your body with hormones, that's definitely going to impact your mental health. So I was just kind of like,
Hmm.
you know what? I like that it asks about pap smears. I like that it asks about, I think it asks about libido. I think it asks about sexually transmitted diseases. It asks about, a few things that I like. But I'm like, how the hell is birth control not on here? So
Not
I
on
just
there.
make
Yeah.
sure to ask my clients, like, are you on birth control? Have you been on birth control in the past? And yeah, and sometimes
And even asking what type, right? Because some think that, like, oh, if it's non hormonal IUD, there isn't really, it shouldn't make a difference. But it actually does because there are some that are very sensitive to the copper, and the copper actually interacts with zinc. But zinc is also a coenzyme to so many other cellular functions. And so it might seem like, oh, it's not going to be that because it's not hormonal. And actually, you are very much so having a response to it, but they don't really they wouldn't really think that it is or that it does,
and
right?
it's a type of medication, right? It's something that's having an effect on our bodies, and it's telling
Right.
us something, right? And so if there's a part in the form that says what medications are you on, and this is why, like back when I was on birth control, and I'd get that question when I'd go to a GP, I'd be like, oh, am I on medication? I'm like, does birth control count? And sometimes they'd say, like, oh no, you don't need to put that on there, and I'm like,
What?
with some of them, they'd be like, "Oh, yeah, put it on there," but they still wouldn't really care or like ask any questions or try to make that connection, right? And I'm like,
Yeah.
"Oh, it is very important because it's definitely impacting our bodies and it's telling us quite a bit." And whether you're on birth control or not, going back to what you were saying, it is so important to just check in with our bodies and to just make that a part of our daily routine and make it a habit and to actually just observe what's going on, like everything, like you said, like how much water you're drinking, like bowel movements, like everything, right? And then
Yeah.
yeah, it's all telling us something. And so when we start to look at it in that way, then we start to think like, oh, okay, this is what's happening. And yeah, I love all the education that you gave us about, the different menstrual cycles, right? And the phases. And I have been learning, a little bit about the luteal phase, right? And yeah,
Mhm.
there's some people saying like, oh, you're supposed to, you're more likely to feel this and this and that. But I love that you kind of brought in like the example of like, oh, some people are not feeling that way. And then they're thinking like, oh, is there something wrong? And I think that yeah, sometimes we spend so much time stressed about like, oh, what does this mean? Like this is different from last month. And so I love that you kind of said, like, let's approach this, objectively, let's observe and, try to let go of that judgment. And like energy is just energy. And let's just see what this is telling us, right? And that's what I try to
Yeah.
do with my clients is just remind them again and again. Like I sound like a broken record, but I'm like, can we bring more compassion into this, And I'm like, but it's so relevant to whatever it is that we're talking about. I'm like, yeah, oftentimes we are so harsh on ourselves, and we have that inner critic and that inner critic shows up in so many different parts of our lives with anything. Like
Mm.
even if, like, oh, I didn't have cramps this month. What does that mean? Even if it's a good thing, you're like,
They're trying to find, because yeah, you're like, what did I do that there isn't any cramps right now? Like, and I want to know, like, and yeah, like I remember I used to have like some of these women didn't know what to do with themselves because they didn't really know, like, because the symptoms weren't really there. So then they thought something was wrong, and then like, oh, lo and behold, here's this cycle, and then it's like, holy guacamole. Like, I remember one sent me a text. She was like, "This is the best cycle I've had in like 10 years." And I'm like, full, like, so I'm like, yay,
so right away,
and
but this is weird. This has never happened. Like what? Like something
yeah,
not gonna happen again.
I know. It's like,
Or
don't say that. Don't say it's not going to happen again. This is what we, this is what we want to know. Like, we want to, it's really being able to see the expression. So it's seeing what is expressing on the physical form is simply giving you information, right? So if it's changing, then that means then like something else has changed and it's showing you like, all right, well, I'm feeling this, like I did get some nourishment. I did, like, mental health wise, like everything seems like it's pretty kosher, or at least in a way that the body is handling it well. When I say handling it well, I mean we are designed to be able to handle stress. So all of the talk about stress management, quote unquote, I don't know what they're talking about. Like, it's more, I go at it from the angle of, let me help you, support you to get your body in a position that it can actually handle stress, because we're going to experience stress. And so many would want to say like, oh, it's like caveman days and all this other jazz. And it's like, yeah, they didn't know when a dinosaur was going to just pop out, right? And so like, or didn't really know like this volcano just erupted. And so then like they just kind of like went running for the hills. But at the same time, when that immediate threat was removed, ideally the body would come to a point where it's like, all right, now we can do these other functions because we survived that. And I think that that's the thing. It's about equipping our body to be able to do what it's meant to do and what it's designed to do naturally. That's what attracted me to Eastern medicine and wanting to study that in the first place. Was I was like, wait a second. Like, when I actually started getting an understanding of what was going on, it was like, oh, so we're actually like looking at what's all involved in someone's life. And then we're basically kind of just seeing that these signs and symptoms that are popping up are pretty much a culmination of what's happening. Yet all we're doing is just kind of putting the body in a position to be able to handle it better. And and I personally, since like graduating, I mean, like, I incorporate spirituality a lot more into it as well. Um But I will say that, like, even it's kind of weird, but like, so the spirit within Chinese medicine has always been there. So it's not like I'm doing something new. It's always been there. It's just that, like, the way that it was historically brought over, parts of it was removed so that it would be adopted in the West. So like when you were saying, you would ask your clients, like, how can you invite more play in and all of that jazz? And then in my head, I'm thinking, well, a lot of it is not really sure. They're not really sure, like, what play might be. They're not really sure, like, what's their type of play, right? And so then that's where I bring in, the play styles, right? Like, so that they can identify, like, what's their predominating ones, even though all 5 exist within them, but what's their predominating ones to kinda help make it a little bit of an easier process, because ultimately, when we're talking about play, we're also talking about embodiment.
Mhm.
So, when there's so much of, like, mental health, it's like it still just further takes you from the body. So then, like, I love that you're introducing them and inviting them to come into the body. How do you do that? You might come into the body if you simply just take a walk in a park, or if you stand outside with your feet on the ground with no shoes on. Right? Like, if you have that ability, if you have access to that, then that in and of itself is a part of play. You are interacting with nature. You're in tuning with
Yeah.
nature. It can be very, very calming. The elements that come from the ground and from the soil and from the earth that interact with us can be extremely calming. That's where forest bathing comes from. Like, in that,
Oh my God,
some
yeah.
places definitely have the major forests to do that. Like, you can go and do
Mm.
that. Where I'm at, it's beaches,
Like,
so, like, it's mostly beaches and, like, the bay, and so, like, I try to find, like, my spots around here. But that to me is all play. It's just tuning. It's asking yourself to kinda just tune in, and the thing is not even necessarily like, going inward all the time. It's just more of getting the body to express and come out. You
mhm.
know, like, is it just playing beats, instrumental beats and drumming, and then just allowing your body to just kind of feel it? And for some, they might like, what do you mean? Like, they might have to have like some choreography or something like that, especially with TikTok and all of that. And it's like, no, you really don't. If you actually just sit with, so like, different energy centers and the acupuncture points actually have frequencies, sound frequencies associated with them. So then as you are experiencing sound, it's actually you're tuning in literally to the sound. So if you allow something to play and just kind of be with it, and it may at first seem like nothing's happening, but if you really can sit with it for about 2 minutes, you're going to start to feel shifts, right? And they can be very subtle, or even sometimes when you might find that you're moving and you don't even know why you're moving, but then all of a sudden you start tuning in. Now, mentally, you've caught up that the body's been listening to music that was around you.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
Like,
that's your way of tuning in,
yeah.
and sound can literally support you in that way. And
Yeah.
so, like, I love sound healing. That's one of my favorite modalities,
Mm.
to help me get out of my own, like, self-talk. Like, I could really sit in a sound bath, and it'll be one of the
One thing
best
that can
ways.
heal from trauma as well, to actually, use music. A lot of my clients, they're artists in some way, shape, or form. There's dance,
Mhm.
there's singing, and I'm like, that use that. Like, let's explore that, For a lot of them, it's about reconnecting with their inner child because they were often told, having come from immigrant families, like, no, you can't be an artist, you can't be a dancer, you can't be a
Mm.
singer, you can't do any of these things. That's not going to make you any money, right? And so it's powerful in a sense of let's help you reconnect with the inner child, but it's also just powerful in the sense of, it allows you, like you said, to connect with your body and it allows you to get to heal from that trauma. And yeah,
Yeah.
sometimes even
And
release
why
these
does
stings. It's so
well, and 'cause and I was gonna ask, like, why is it even then that why is it that our own creativity always has to be that we make money from it? You know? Like, we could just be with the creativity in and of itself. period, like completely separate,
Just unlearning, all the things that we've been told, not just by our immigrant parents, but just by society of like, the starving artist. And no, you shouldn't do that. If you want to make money, if you want to, not live on the street, then you can't be an artist. You can't tune into that creativity. You can't do what you love, what you're passionate about, what you're good at. You have to
Mhm.
do this other job, that you might hate, but this is what being an adult is about. We're fed all these myths, and that in a way is trauma as well, and a lot of my clients,
Yeah.
they come to work on that because they're like, I'm so angry, I'm so resentful, that I couldn't follow this passion, and so, it's so powerful, to connect with their bodies through some way of, sound healing or music or another type of art form. It's yeah, so trying to actually incorporate that is something that I'm doing more of with clients because yeah, it is such a powerful way of healing from that trauma of being, told, no, you can't do this. And even now, even as adults, it's so hard to go against what your immigrant parents want because they've sacrificed so much and there's that guilt and it's complicated and yeah, and so
Mhm.
like letting go of that guilt and stepping into that power. That's we say like I'm all about empowering women of color who are daughters of immigrants to actually live their truths, and that can look at
Yeah.
so many different ways. Living your truth, in your sexuality that might go against the church or whatever, but living your truth, as an artist or whatever it means for you. But living your truth,
Mhm.
I think, is so important to actually being able to heal from that trauma because I think as we know like that trauma is stored in our bodies and it shows up in so many different ways. It affects our physical health, our reproductive health, our sexual health. It affects definitely so many different things. Of course, our mental health. But yeah, I love that you touched on this. And the clients that you see, who have endometriosis and fibroid issues, and that's what I'm seeing more and more of, and that's why I'm starting to ask more questions, and that's why I wanted to have this podcast season all about sex and sexual health and reproductive health and all these things is because I'm seeing those patterns, and I know a little bit about the studies, especially for women of color that yeah, we have, a trauma. And so that shows up in these reproductive issues. And so we're having a lot of these conversations and a lot of these challenges. And so, you know, recognizing that where that comes from and recognizing the importance of actually, healing from this and talking about it
Mhm.
more, I think is important.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, like, I totally appreciate when you mentioned that it was like your theme, and I was like, oh yeah, that's a big one, and that's totally awesome that you're doing it and putting it together. And then I do want to say too, I'll point this out is that like w- it, where the pelvic bowl is and where it's housing, the uterus, the ovaries, the tubes, and all of that, and then it's also in the area of an energy center that actually is our link to culture. It's our link to society. So this is why then um you'll kind of hear this. I don't know what you want to call it, but like you'll hear this message of if you want to know how societies are doing, you turn to women and their fertility because that information is definitely encoded. It's one of those like we are encoding because we're processing what actually is happening. So we're encoding to prep the offspring for being able to survive what is happening now. And so if you can imagine that that's what happened with you. And so where there might be some anger, it's actually looking at it like, "Wow, I'm happy that you're angry." Actually,
Yeah.
because the anger symbolizes that you want change. So anger in Eastern medicine is associated with an element that is definitely all about change. And it's all about um being a little bit more bolder in those changes, and at the same time it's like this wanting to move but sometimes feels like you're stifled and you can't. So if I were to put it together and just saying like here's these reproductive health conditions that are being diagnosed and discovered pretty high, then it's asking those who are being affected, right? and especially if daughters of immigrants. In what ways is it that you can mutate that and alchemize that anger into what it is that you actually would like to see for your culture now? So you can take that information that was encoded and then transmute that. And here's the thing though, and this is the dance of it, is that those that are still stuck or think that that is what's going to happen, like they're not seeing that, like, right now in the present, this is what it is, because their body is still in that. The body doesn't really know the time. It doesn't know timing, right? So they're still in that, but you get to the opportunity to show them otherwise, in that now in this time, you're going to take that information and be like, how in the world can I use this now and offer my gifts, my unique gifts to my culture?
Yeah.
Because that's how it is that you're impacting the collective. It's not just biologically, like I said, through the bio offspring, but then in the way that your gifts and your role within the collective is also being done. And that means then it needs to express. Your unique expression must express. Otherwise, it's going to show up that it's not exactly expressing, and it can show up in the different areas of the body. And because we're focusing on reproductive, that's where I'm staying right now. But there's definitely different places of the body that things can show up in, the patterns and all of that jazz that can give you some insight as to, oh, it's this. Like, here's a little twist to that. Okay, got it. But in this case, very generalized. I get it, but it is around an energy center that is connected to your connection to your culture. And so it's exploring what cultures are you tapped into, the ones that are known and unknown. If And how you can identify that is if you were even to ask, like, what roles do you play
Oh,
in
that's my
life?
favorite activity to do with my clients.
With every single role, so that you know this, with every single role, then there's going to be conscious and unconscious,
Yeah.
right? Identity things and beliefs that they have their own little cultures about it that's related to that role. And so you can play with it, and then kind of begin to explore, okay, which one might it be? For some, you don't even have to go through that. You just kind of know. And and it comes out. And I did want to say too, because I can see people getting stuck in the healing process. Like, they're like, I'm always healing and I'm on this healing journey and all this other jazz. And it's like, explore what healing means, because sometimes people don't even see that they actually would have, there was something that would have already been healed, but they don't see it that way because there's an
And I like
expectation
to
of,
point out that progress. That's one of my
yeah,
favorite jobs as a therapist, is pointing out the progress, reminding my clients, like, look, you've come this far. I know you don't see
yep,
it. That's why I'm here. I'm that hype woman.
yeah.
There's
It's
so
like,
many
what?
roles within being a therapist, but hype woman is one of my favorite ones. I'm like, no, you're doing
Hype
great.
woman.
You healed this already. Like, yeah, okay. So we have a lot more to heal. That's okay. Healing is lifelong journey, but like, let's look at, like, wow, you've come this far. So yeah, I love
Yeah.
such a good reminder.
It's it is just, yeah, just seeing what those expectations are, seeing what that looks like for you. My favorite definition of healing, it comes from Tina Zion, and she's like, it's just when something is no longer a burden. And it's
Oh,
so simple. So
yeah.
simple, right? Like, and it's true. It's just like, because the thing is some people think like, oh, I healed because I forgot. Like, and it's like, no, not
Um,
really.
yeah.
It's really more of, you have the experience with it, and now it's just, is it burdening you though?
Yeah.
Because, like, if it's not burdening you anymore, then it's like, all right, cool. Then
Yeah.
that bit is like all healed up,
Mm,
packaged up very well, and everything's all gravy. Like, and so it's like you can then feel free,
yeah.
right? And I think too, another thing that, and you can tell me if this is valid or not, like, in the journey for them, sometimes I think they might even feel guilty that they actually are experiencing something different than what their parents or ancestors experienced. So kind of similar to, like, almost a survivor's guilt in a way, but it's not really, like, you know?
Episode. Survivor's guilt, because it's so common. Yeah. something that we all struggle with. So yeah, definitely there's so much more to say. No, definitely. You nailed it right. Oh my God, this has been such a good conversation. I feel like we could keep going for hours and hours, and there's just so much that we have in common, so much that we're just, yeah, right there. We're just thinking the same. And I love
Yeah.
what you're doing for the people that you serve. And I love even more that you're a speaker and you're taking, what you know into a one to many approach and hosting these workshops. I love it all. So please tell us where it is that people can connect with you, can support your work. Tell us what you have coming up. Please tell us.
Ooh, yeah, thank you for allowing me to do so. I would say come check me out at joindenicea.com. So that's JOINDENICEA.com. I do keep that page fairly like up to date, and it's just quick buttons of like, oh, this is an event I'm speaking at. Oh, download the app here. Come join this community. Um, what I have coming up actually, and I've been working on these simultaneously is quite funny. Um, so it's like there's like 8 projects going on at the same time. That's just me. But I actually am opening up an academy. So like I've asked myself, how is it that I could really break down these things that I know that are playing a role? Like how are they showing up in the body, and then how do they affect you and your authentic being, your expression, like what's your discovering your gifts, your purpose, and all of that jazz, and how can we use the body? So like I asked, like, how can I break this down into chunks? So then that's where these courses, these mini courses are coming from. In that, and then also love asking questions. I'm pretty sure you can hear me asking a bunch of rhetorical questions. So that's where like the guided journals of the My Soul Says collection is coming from. So just kind of like, even those I had to like theme them out because I'm like, there's
Oh,
so much, I need to organize it. So like kind of organizing it for use, that you can just kind of like take and apply if it's a guided journal or a declaration deck, a declaration, not an affirmation deck. So that way you can just kind of like pull those digitally, um, and have those available all through the My Soul Sets collection too.
amazing. Yes. And I'll make sure to include all the links to where people can find you in the description of this episode. So make sure to look for it there. Make
Thank
sure to
you.
go follow on the socials and just connect with her, reach out because yes, she has a huge wealth of knowledge that I feel like we just scraped the surface, like the very top of the surface with how much you know. And I just love everything that you're doing. So yes, thank you so much again for coming on the podcast. This has been an amazing episode and I think it's going to help so many people. So yes, thank you. Thank you. And
Thank
we'll be in touch. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode. As always, I am here to be open, honest, and vulnerable with you because you are not alone. If you want to support this podcast, please make sure to leave a review so others can find it as well. If you're interested in working with me, you can find me at www.globalcitizentherapy.com. And if you'd like to heal your relationship with self-care and learn more about how to find the type of soul care that works for you, you can find the link to my workshop in the description of this podcast episode. Thank you again and see you next time.